So we talked in the last class about preserving the Qur'an in the written medium, which was back then a revolutionary medium for keeping the material. And we have also discussed that part of the effect of novelty was probably the deviation from the norms of Arabic spelling in some verses of the Quran. We also discussed the traditional perspective that the deviations were tawqifi, meaning they have always existed from the beginning, and they existed on purpose from the as a part of the divine revelation. And we have also gone really quickly through some of the examples that may not support that. And we also talked about the other group of traditional Arab scholars, especially early scholars who were under the assumption that the Arabic writing system was in its infancy, therefore it was expected to have issues in spelling that came in the form of deviation. That said, I also concluded our conversation last time by saying it's appealing to connect deviation to particular contextual and or semantic meaning for the deviating form. The methodological problem is that it's difficult to come up with a generalizable rule to connect a certain form of a deviation to a particular semantic attitude. And also part of our conclusion was that even a historical development argument is not quite strong because it's in one text, in one copy of the Mus'haf, as we have seen in very early discussions in this class, you could see changes. You could see differences between words written in the same, written in different ways, the same word written in different ways. So that was the hurdle of recording the Quran in writing. And finally, we came to the point that the Quran was an oral text that was revealed to an oral society and meant from the very beginning to be transmitted orally, memorized, and handed down to generations and posterity by memorizing it. Any question about what we have covered so far? No? Okay. Today, we start talking about the rendition of the Quran orally, about the oral reproduction of the Quran. And if we look at tradition, either of memorizing or the rules of pronouncing the Quran, we can see that it is a performance. And I do not mean by performance that it is a form of art for the purpose of entertainment. That's not what I mean by performance. What I mean is that in the out loud recitation of the Quran, the individual is expected to use phonological, phonetic, and syllabic rules that set the Quranic production apart from any other oral production in Arabic, be that production for an artistic purpose, poetic, vocalic, or otherwise, or quotidian, mundane, linguistic production of using your dialect or classical Arabic out loud. Again, the out loud recitation of the Quranic text follows sound rules that differ from dialects and classical Arabic. Any question?
How much is known about the oral recitations prior to the Quran in Arabic, and how much, what is there any comparison between them?
That's a good question. All we know about oral recitations before the Quran, or even in contemporary times of the Quran, is taken from poetry, pre-Islamic Arabic poetry. In most of the cases, poetry was either sung in accompaniment with a musical instrument or chanted. Right? And I want you to underline the word chanted and keep it in your minds, because in the examples we will be seeing today, there is a remnant of that. Other questions? Or comments? Okay. So that audible distinction between the recitation of the Quran and other material in Arabic, dialect, or classical is the result of a system of rules. And that system of rules cannot be generalized for the sounds of the Arabic language and or its dialect. It's a system of rules that is specific only to the text of the Quran. And that system of rules usually results in two manners of out loud recitation of the Holy Book. One is tajweed, and one is tartiil. Both are different manners, but both follow the same system of specialized rules. We'll focus today on tajweed. In language, can you guys tell me what tajweed means linguistically in Arabic?
Does it just mean the types of, like, I know visually what it looks like in like a mushaf when you have the colored letters, and it just helps you pronounce the words in different kinds of ways and put the right emphasis on the right parts of the word.
That's a specialized meaning. I'm wondering about the general meaning of the word tajweed, the non-specific meaning.
Something like intonation.
Interestingly, no. Okay, so tajweed is a masdar of the form to jawwada, yujawwid. The masdar is tajweed, and comes from the root jim, waw, dal. Do we know other words from the same root?
Jawda,
Yeah, which is
quality.
quality. Yeah, absolutely. And do we know the word jayyid?
Good.
Yeah. So form two, jawada.
To give the quality of making it good. To make it good.
Yeah. Yes, to make good. Yes. So in language, in Arabic, tajweed is making good. By extension, is making beautiful. Specifically, though, tajweed has a specialized function, has a specialized meaning. So the technical meaning of tajweed is a system of phonological and phonetic rules that regulate the pronunciation of the Quranic sounds. So that system of rules is generalizable only within the context of the Quran. Some of these rules are rules of assimilation and dissimilation common to any other Arabic being spoken verbally out loud. Others are not. The function of tajweed is in fact threefold. So the system of sound rules exists for three different reasons. It's preservative, distinctive, and additive. And let me explain. It is assumed that, and underline assumed, that when the Quran was revealed, it was revealed to the Prophet in these sounds. The rules of tajweed are therefore made to preserve the original sound and pronunciation patterns that, quote unquote, were thought to have existed during the first time of revelation. That is because the Quran is holy not only in its content, but also in its language. So the purpose of the individual is to preserve and transmit to posterity as much of the original pronunciation patterns as possible. That's the preservative part. The additive function is, in fact, when you listen to the Quran from a person who's well trained in the art of tajweed. It's the closest thing to a vocalist. It's beautiful. It's systematic. It's rhythmic, and it's beautiful. The third function of tajweed is distinctive. Interestingly, in an oral culture, an out loud insertion of a Quranic verse or parts thereof in the quotidian conversation or speech of an individual or more, with the rules of tajweed, allows the language or the text of that language to be foregrounded. To be in proverbial bold form in comparison to the rest of the speech or the conversation. The additive and the distinctive functions of tajweed are what constitutes the oral performative aspect of this text-specific system of rules. Any question? Or comment?
You said it was assumed that it was revealed this way. The one thing that I remember reading in is that the pauses were something that came later. But I don't know, maybe you want to comment. Is that what you're referring to, or something else?
No, so it was how the sounds were produced was theoretically how the prophet spoke them, right? Theoretically, I said. Okay, other questions? No?
Is there ever a point in which this is used in like exegesis, like actually finding meaning in the Quran? Do scholars use tajweed in any way in that form, or is it purely performative?
It is purely exegetical in its function. It's quite performative only. In other words, there is no relationship between content and the rules of tajweed. Unlike a previous assumption about deviation from the rules of the Quranic lesson. Other questions? No? Okay. I would like now to share with you my screen and go to our oh God, sorry. Go to our module. Are you guys able to see my my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. I have an example, a sample of tajweed, and here it is from the YouTube.
Professor, the audio isn't coming out for me. I don't know if it's like this for everyone else.
Yeah, it's very muted.
It's very choppy, yeah.
You guys cannot hear?
I can, but very little.
Okay, very good. Thank you for telling me. Can you go to the module and go down to the link that says tajweed sample, right? And listen to the first couple of minutes. Now, what did you notice?
Well, I noticed with some of the letters at the end of words, they're extended, like the pronunciation.
Okay, so some of the sounds will extend. Like what sounds?
Like I heard a lot of like the nun and the meme.
Yes, because noon and meme are semi-vowels. You can, in fact, extend them. You're absolutely right, Fred. Okay, something else?
It's a Michigander whose accent is said to be very nasally. I've noticed that they kind of like excessively nasalize the nuns and the
Yes.
memes.
Yes, the noons and the memes come with a hunna, which is nasalization, absolutely. Yes. What else? Apart from the noon and meme.
The words are said in succession. There's not much of a gap in between. Just make it flow.
Yes, there is a flow of the words. Absolutely right, Muhammad. Yes. Any other remarks?
There was one part too. I forgot the words, but it was a very evident like break in the flow. Like there was a pause and then he continued reciting.
Okay.
I think Jared was the one that mentioned something about the breaks.
Mm-hmm. Let me then, from what you guys said, summarize that this is not a regular pronunciation of Arabic. This person is not reciting something like an audiobook, right?
Yes.
And how this is different from a regular out loud recitation of Arabic is that this gives you the impression that the person is not singing, but chanting, right? And chanting happens as a function of lengthening vowels, extending noon and meme, and the nasalization. A lot of the rules of tajweed are summarized in these remarks of yours. And this chanting technique follows universal rules of tajweed. But that speed, that lack of separation between words, is a tradition of the Gulf Arab reciters of the Quran. Okay. Any question?
Yes. You mentioned it's a tradition. Do you know from where the tradition stemmed or why?
Well, I do not know, honestly speaking, I do not know where it stemmed from, but I know that it came unique because it was not the Egyptian school. By the beginning of the 20th century, with the invention of broadcasting and the radio stations, and also with the advent of recordings, the Egyptian school was dominant in Africa and in Asia. So now if you go to Indonesia, Malaysia, or even Brunei, you would hear them recite the Quran like an Egyptian, because traditionally they have been trained to do so by Egyptians, and we'll see some examples of that later in class today. But the Gulf states have not been trained in the same way. Where they came from, honestly, I do not know. I'm sorry if this is disappointing, but I really do not know.
Oh, never disappointing from you. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions that I can answer? No? Okay. I will ask you a question that may sound a little strange. Was that recitation enjoyable, even if you did not understand the meaning?
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Say it again.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's very melodic.
Melodic, yes. And what? Melodic, so it's beautiful. It gave you a feeling of what?
Not to repeat the title, but I felt calm.
Yes. Yes, it's a soothing feeling, absolutely.
It's like feeling given to contemplation, though, and going along with the calmness. It's, I mean, if I knew the meaning of the words as well as I should, it would be very easy to kind of almost have a religious sense of contemplation coming from that.
Yes. But remember, Jared, the content of the text is not easy to access, but the text continues to be attractive to the ear, right? I think a part of the preservation of the text is that it's attractive to the ear. Let me give you an anecdote. Famous reciters of the Quran are as rich, if not richer, than some of the very successful artists, very successful performers. In the Arab world, until recently, you could, in fact, bring a Quranic reciter to a wedding, to a funeral home, and to other different social functions and gatherings as well. In the 40s, villages and small towns used to invite world-renowned Quranic reciters to spend the holy month of Ramadan, where they finish reciting the Quran out loud every night after breakfast, and finish the whole Quran before the end of Ramadan. They would spend thousands and thousands of pounds doing that. So the performative function of the text, I think helps keep the text attractive to the human ear, regardless of accessibility to the content of the text. Of course, if a person gains access or degree thereof to the function, the content, and the implication of the text, I do not know how far the person would be able to enjoy the verse being recited rather than being contemplative, as Janet just said.
I guess I'm thinking though, in like the Buddhist and the Hindu traditions of mantra, it's not always the case that even then the what one is repeating is necessarily understood by the person directly. Because even some mantras, they tend to be in Sanskrit, they tend to be in a language that people don't, even practitioners don't always fully understand. But it's the repetition of it that sometimes, the repetition of the melodic repetition of it that sometimes brings a contemplative state and where there is understanding drawn from it.
True. There is a degree of revelation that comes from it. Right? Yeah. Possibly. Okay. Now, the rules, any questions, or shall we move on? Move on. Okay. The rules of tajweed are written in manuals, right? But they are essentially transferred from a coach to a learner by direct contact. By direct teaching. The rules of tajweed in most of the cases are very difficult to deal with without live examples and as many examples as possible, because tajweed depends in many instances on repetition and imitation of a teacher, a mentor. So even when you try to read a tajweed manual, the explanation and the definition of rules or terms is very difficult and vague. But the presence of a mentor allows the individual to learn by hands-on, to learn firsthand. It is not an art that you read about and apply when you recite the Qur'an. It is in fact an art you hear and grasp by your ear. And then perform, and then imitate. Tajweed manuals do exist. But they do exist as an auxiliary form. A study guide to both the mentor and the learner. Any question? Why am I talking about manuals now? Because again, in the traditional sense of transmitting the Quran orally between a mentor and a learner, some of the rules of tajweed are ingrained in the memorization process, in the process of rote learning. Right? Any question or comment? So you may assume, and I do, that along the centuries, these rules of recitation have existed in the same way. And this oral tradition of transmitting the rules was very hard to access and to accept by Western scholars of Arabic and of the Quran. Western scholars deal with the Quran as a written text. As a text they can analyze because it came to them in the form, in a written form, in a book form. While again, the Quran isn't made to be in a book form. It was an oral product. Therefore, tajweed is, to Western scholars of the Quran, in fact, an auxiliary field, and sometimes a nuisance, to be honest, because it does not follow the rules of the Arabic phonology. And it is not generalizable. And to Arab scholars, they venerate the rules of tajweed as part of revelation and overemphasize the preservative function of tajweed. And this divination does not allow them to understand the performative oral functions of tajweed. Although, linguistically speaking, tajweed is not informative historically in the history of Arabic sounds, and is not informative in so far as the content of the Quran is concerned. But the Quran is performance as well as content. That's why I asked you about the feelings it gave you. Any question or comment?
Can you talk more about how it doesn't follow the rules of chronology and it isn't generalizable?
So, for instance, why is the nasalization of ma and na overemphasized? This is not how we pronounce mim and nun in the Arabic dialects or in classical Arabic. Why are some of the hamzas in the Quran weaker than they are in classical Arabic and in the dialects? These, and also why are vowels in the Quran longer than they are, for instance, in early Islamic poetry? So, historically speaking, the rules of, you cannot say that the rules of tajweed can tell us something about how vowels were pronounced or how the meme or the noon were pronounced in the Arabic dialects during the times of revelation. Right? Any other question?
One more question. I know that we're talking about qira'ats later, but is this tajweed basically the rules don't differ based upon the different readings, or are there different rules?
No, these are purely out loud recitation sound rules. Have nothing to do with qira'at. In grammatical or semantic meaning of qira'at. That's a very good question, Brian. Thank you. Other questions or comments? No? Okay. Next week, we will talk in details about the rules of tajweed. But generally speaking, tajweed describes some حروف أصلية, phonemes, and describes some allophones, حروف فرعية. So the meme and the noon are حروف أصلية, phonemes. But the nasalization of the meme and the noon is حروف فرعية. Allophones, the nasalized meme and the nasalized noon are allophones of the phoneme meme and the phoneme noon, respectively. Who knows what a phoneme is and what an allophone is? Or who can explain to us what a phoneme is and what an allophone is?
Sound and speech, an individual unit of sound and speech.
That's what. Is that the phoneme or the allophone?
That's the phoneme.
So can you say what a phoneme is again, please?
Individual unit of sound and speech.
Yes, so the phoneme is the ideal sound, one sound, the ideal sound in speech, in a language. So is a phoneme, n is a phoneme, t is a phoneme, b is a phoneme, right? So why do I say ideal? Because a phoneme is the sound in a language without being under any influence, decontextualized. What's an allophone?
Variations from that ideal, basically, in ways that it is pronounced in the actual speech of the language.
Yes,
Different.
it's the same sound, but actually produced and contextualized in the language. So b is a phoneme, but biyut, b in biyut, is the allophone because it could be influenced by the sound before it or after it, could be assimilated, could be nasalized like na or ma, or it could be extended and so on. So tajweed on the level of the individual sound, on the level of the individual consonant sound, it describes phonemes, حروف أصلية, technically called, and allophones, حروف فرعية, technically called. And this description, like I said before, on paper, in writing, is very vague, but in pronunciation, with plenty of examples, is not so. Okay. So, in the description of حروف أصلية and حروف فرعية, experts discuss the points of articulation of each of these sounds, where it is pronounced. Is it pronounced from the vocal cords, like a hamza, or from any other spot on the vocal tract reaching upwards from the vocal cords to the lips? That is the place of articulation. Also, when describing consonants as حروف أصلية or حروف فرعية, we're not only discussing the place of articulation, but also the manner of articulation. Voice, is they sound voiced or voiceless, and so on. Right? So, in the description of phonemes, we talk about where from they are pronounced, and how they are pronounced. In the discussion of حروف فرعية, the allophones, there are 3 basic points. Assimilation, technically called idgham. Dissimilation, technically called izhar. And nunation, technically called ghunna. Can anybody explain to me what assimilation is?
Are we talking in terms of psychology or language?
um, in terms of phonetics and phonology, can you tell me, okay, tell me in psychology what assimilation is?
Assimilation would be the process of taking on a dominant culture when you join a new society.
Yes. And assimilation in the sounds of a language is 2 phonemes or 2 sounds coming closer. So, for instance, or one sound adopting a quality of another of a neighboring sound. Usually, assimilation in Arabic is progressive, meaning the later sound affects. It's the earlier sound affects the later sound. So the word tube in Arabic, for instance, is umbuba, right? And if you hear me carefully, you would see that the ba sound in umbuba is in fact more of a pa than a ba, more voiceless than voice. And that's because it's preceded by a meme, which is in fact in which the lips are closed tight, and then ba is also pronounced after that, so it gets the voicelessness from the preceding sound. That's assimilation. So assimilation is one sound acquiring qualities from a neighboring sound.
Would an example of this be like if I was reading like Mardatillahi or Annallahu, like when the previous sounds kind of change, would I end up saying the end of Allah?
Yeah. Okay, that's why, for instance, we say billahi, where Allah is pronounced Allah, billahi, because of the previous E in B. Billahi, while ma'allah, the previous vowel A affects the vowel in Allah as ma'allah. Billah, ma'allah, fillah, ilallah. That's idgham. Okay, what is izhar? Dissimilation. Can somebody explain what dissimilation is?
Can I guess?
Yeah, guessing is good.
Would it be the opposite then of assimilation? So one part of a word has no bearing on the other?
Yes. Separating the 2 sounds so they can be pronounced in their full qualities. And this usually happens by the addition of a short anaptectic vowel. Short vowel in between the two sounds to separate them, to form a barrier so they can be pronounced each with its full different distinctive qualities, sound qualities. So three processes in the discussion of allophones in the rules of tajweed: assimilation, idgham; dissimilation, izhar; and ghunna, the extra nasalization of noon and mim. Any question or comment?
So we have a case where when introducing two sets of words, one becomes dominant and I guess overshadows the other. And then the dissimulation was where we separate them so that way they're both pronounced with their full birth. Do we
Yes.
one where when two come together, one gets silent or one gets hidden from the other?
Oh, what do you mean? I do not understand this. I'm sorry.
Yes. So for the assimilation, for example, the Mahmoud's example, billah or billahi, do we have one where, so instead of one being dominant over the other while the other one is still pronounced, do we have an example where one of them does become dominant, but it completely overshadows the other? It makes it recessive.
Yeah, in some cases, one sound overshadows the other completely.
Okay.
And that is what you see in the cases where there is a shadda.
I see. So the shadda is there to notify that this is becoming hidden, rather than it is hidden because of the shadda.
So yes, the shadda tells you that there are two sounds that have merged into one.
Okay, so the shadda is just a notifier. It doesn't hold any weight on its own.
No,
is
it does not.
Patient.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Now, let's talk about what happens to vowels in the rules of tajweed. So far, we've talked about phonemes, consonant phonemes, حروف أصلية, and consonant allophones, حروف فرعية. We said that three processes happen to the allophones: idgham, izhar, and ghunna. But when we talk about vowels, we talk about extended and stable syllables. And that happens to the vowel. And the extension of the vowel is by beats: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 6. So for a word like qala, you can extend it by 2 beats, qala, by 3, qala, by 4, qala, by 5, qala, and by 6. and this is the extension, mad. The opposite process is shortening the long vowels. Which, is the opposite process. But when a reciter adopts extension, it has to be consistent all through the recitation, and it also has to be proportional. So if the word, for instance, contains a combination of long and short vowels, and the reciter will extend, then the reciter should extend the long vowels by double the beats that he or she extends the short vowels. And do it in every case in the recitation where he or she recites long vowels and where he or she recites short vowels. So extension and or shortening of vowels in the rules of tajweed needs to be proportionate and consistent. And that's what you hear as giving the recitation, that chanting, and the consistency is what gives the recitation that soothing feeling. Questions or comments?
So I'm a little confused actually by the shortening of the long vowels. Is that an either or? You either extend them or shorten them? You don't kind of do both at the same time?
You cannot do both to the same. So you cannot lengthen the long vowel and shorten it at the same time, right?
Okay. So you're basically either making it quite a bit shorter or quite a bit longer. I'm guessing though you can only kind of like have the long vowel. You can't do anything less than that, right?
Yes, true. So far. Any other questions before I move on? So far, I talked about حروف أصلية that are consonants, حروف فرعية that are consonants, and I also talked about vowels and what happens to vowels. The rules of tajweed are not only concerned with the individual sounds, but they are also concerned with some formulae. The beginning of the surah and the end of the surah. And the pauses between parts in the Quran. So how Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim is pronounced or chanted, and how Sadaqallahu al-Azim at the end of each of the surah is pronounced or chanted or not. and when to chant أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. So the rules of tajweed are not limited to the individual sounds and or to the syllable, but also to the formula in the beginning and at the end of the surah. Any question? So the reason why I asked you to hear 3 minutes of that is to show you again the lengthening of long vowels, but he kept all the short vowels short. And at the same time, if you notice, this recording is for 45 minutes and it's 40 verses only from Surah Maryam, right? And please note that the first 3 minutes that I asked you to listen to are only 6 verses. And in the 3 minutes, he did not repeat a verse or word. And this happens by, this lengthening happens by function of the pauses, because he pauses a lot between the verses, and also because of the lengthening of vowels and the nunation. Did you notice that? Okay. No response?
I noticed the emphasis of noon.
Yeah. Meme, noon, and pauses between verses. Okay. So following these rules can lead to 3 different speeds in the recitation of the Quran. What you've just heard is what we traditionally and technically call a muhaqqaq recitation, which is slow and time-consuming. Muhaqqaq recitations follow the rules of tajweed. They tend to lengthen long vowels. They tend to nasalize, and they tend to extend pauses. And the reciter you've just heard is a Sheikh Muhammad Rifa. He's an iconic figure in Quranic recitation in the Arab world. Again, I will share my screen and you guys will go again to the links so you can go down and notice so go to the last link that says speedy reading. And I want you to listen to the first 3 minutes of that recitation, please. And we'll come back to discuss it. Techniques that Abdul Basit Abdul Samad uses in this recitation allows him to read with the rules of tajweed, but very fast, speedy. However, with Ya Ayyuha al-Insanu ma gharraka, he diverts to a muhaqqaq reading. Pauses, extensions of vowels, lengthening of ghannas, and repetitions. Any questions or comments?
What's the speedy reading called in Arabic again?
Honestly, I am trying to remember as we're speaking, and I forgot. I would remember and say it to you. But if I do not remember to the end of the class, it's in the text of the readings. I apologize.
That's okay.
Oh, it's called Hard and Tagwir. Hard is the speedy reading. Okay? Now, in addition to the 3 manners of speed in the tajweed of the Qur'an, following the rules of the system, there is another manner of recitation, which is tartiil. And tartiil is not easy to distinguish by description from tajweed. But again, due to the nature of this art, the distinction between tartiil and tajweed becomes audible when you are able to listen to an example. That is why I brought an example and attached the link to the example, so you guys can take a look at it. Can you go? Do you see my page?
Yes.
Yep.
There is a link called Tartiil Sample. Please listen to the first 3 minutes, and then we'll come back.
Recording in progress.
Okay, guys. You have heard Surah Al-Fatiha, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. How quick was that?
That was very quick.
Why was it quick? What made it quick?
It's just he didn't say any of the words or the vowels or consonants for long at all. He was very quick with
Yeah.
them.
Yes. There is no lengthening. There is symmetrical pauses between verses, like one beat pause, and that's it. Tartiil is not ornamented recitation of the Quran. So what makes the chant in tajweed is absent in tartiil. So you can say that in fact tartiil is chantless tajweed. Interestingly, tajweed is more of a social function of the Quran than tartiil. Tartiil is more of an educational or pedagogical function of the Quran. It's suited more for educational purposes, while tajweed is suited more for the experience, for savoring the text. In our next conversation, inshallah, we will be talking about manuals of tajweed, and I'll bring you samples. And we will also be talking about the rules of tajweed. And we'll discuss them together and try to differentiate between the sound rules of tajweed and the sound rules of classical Arabic. Any question or comments? Or concern about the class today?
Since you study the history of this, would you say that the tartiil is older, or what form is older?
This is an educated list, right? Tartiil seems to me to be more to be older, and the rules of tajweed must have developed as the Quran took its position as a governing cultural product. Any other question?
So in the beginning of class, you said it is assumed that this was how the Prophet um, brought the Quran and how it was recited. But then you said now that tartil is older and tajweed likely came about after the Quran um, became like a governing book. Um, can you explain a little bit more about that? Like how if tajweed is more of like the original, based more on the original recitation from the Prophet, then how is tartil older?
Well, remember I said it was assumed to be, was presumed by the Arabs to be. I didn't say it was revealed as such. Right?
Yeah, but I guess my question is then, if it was presumed to be, then where did tartil come from?
Well, tartil is, if you look at what tartil is, it's basically reciting the text out loud clearly without the chanting of tajweed. Right? And with that, a lot of assimilation and dissimilation processes will also vanish because there is no chanting. And the Quran itself, within its text, advises believers to وَرَتِّلِ الْقُرْآنَ تَرْتِيلًا. Right? My assumption, and this is also an assumption, so I'm underline that and take it with a grain of salt. It has to have had its origin in a non-Muslim religious tradition, in one of the Aramaic churches, probably.
Okay.
Probably. Do
Yeah.
not believe me. This is mine.
Assumption.
Yeah. Of
Thank you.
course. Other questions? Or comments? No? Okay. Then I will let you be. Enjoy your evening, and I'll see you next week, inshallah, where we go deeper into the rules and manuals of the Tajweed. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.